There's been lots of debate going on about why, after the October 1st missile strike from Iran into Israel, there wasn't an immediate response, because Benjamin Netanyahu came on that same night and actually vowed a authoritative response. There's been many officials afterwards that said the same thing. And Yoav Gallant came back on and said, no, seriously, there's going to be one and it's coming soon. Here's what he said a few days before that.
You saw the strikes that Iran launched against us a short time ago. Those strikes were aggressive, but they failed because they weren't accurate. Just as we have been doing until now in the war on all other fronts, whoever attacks us will be hurt and will pay a price. Our attack will be deadly, precise, and above all, surprising. They will not understand what happened or how it happened. They will see the results.
Now, I've shown in previous episodes here in this space a number of high-ranking or high visibility American officials that are agreeing with that they should strike Iran, that they should decapitate General Kellogg. In fact, said they should take out the Ayatollah, and somehow that would make things better. General Keane said the same kinds of things, that they definitely need to go after the head of the snake. Naftali Bennett has just been going on almost a campaign on the Western media saying, yes, we should go and take the whole thing out because that's the problem for the entire Middle East, etc. But I wonder, Doug, if you can talk about the complexity that's involved here, because it's not just going about Iran. Iran provides 1.5 million barrels a day of oil to China, so they would not take kindly to losing that possibility. And Russia depends upon a lot of the military support from Iran. So both of those two nuclear powers have an incentive for this not to happen. What do you think that the results would be if Israel strikes anyway?
Well, first of all, I don't know that Mr. Netanyahu in his current position has much choice. Let's look at the facts on the ground. Now, people in Israel do not have a complete picture, despite the fact this is a small country. A lot of people know each other as a result and have sons, daughters, and so forth in the armed forces. When you watch Israeli television, it's quite surprising. They think that the world is their oyster, if you will, and they are the pearl. They seem to think that they can pretty much do whatever. When questioned about the fact that Hamas is still existent, they say, well, it's damaged. Sure, it's damaged, but you set out to annihilate it. And it's recovered pretty dramatically. It has no trouble at all with recruits. What about Hezbollah? Well, we've done a lot of damage to Hezbollah. How far have you gotten into southern Lebanon? What, 1,000 meters, if that? Maybe a little longer? Well, what are you going to do about it? Well, we don't necessarily have to drive all the way to the Litani River. Oh, really? Then what's your plan to annihilate Hezbollah? Well, we think we have time to go back and deal with these problems. We need to bomb Iran. We have to go and destroy Iran. That's the real problem. That's the head of the snake, as you said. That's where people are thinking. And there is no sense whatsoever that the last attack of 180 missiles was actually remarkably accurate. And they were able to hit very significant and sensitive targets. They did not set out to kill large numbers of people. That was by design. The Israelis, on one hand, at the top, I think, recognize they're dealing with a much more formidable enemy than they thought. But on the other hand, they also think, I fear, that the Iranians are feeble, weak, and will essentially take the beating. You know, this is old thinking that goes back into the 70s or the 60s. Those things have changed. Those nations in the region are different now. The people that live there are different. I still don't think that's sunk in, but here's the key thing to keep in mind. The last play and the most important play that Mr. Netanyahu has is to bring us into the war on Israel's behalf against Iran. Now, if you sit down privately with anybody in the White House right now, I think they will confide in you and say, we really don't want a war with Iran. I know that in the Department of Defense, the attitude at the highest levels is we really don't want a war with Iran. They understand what that means. The consequences, as you pointed out earlier, for the global economy, for our own economy, for the financial system, and also for the region, and the potential for bringing Russia into the equation. Or the Russians have thousands of people on the ground in Iran right now. They've built up the air and missile defense apparatus as rapidly and effectively as they can, but they've also flooded lots of other technologies into the country, particularly missiles and weapons. So Iran is ready in a way that it has probably never been to deal with this Israeli attack.
And
And
Doug, let me
Iran
ask you
will
something.
not exercise any restraint after Israel attacks them. That's over, because I'm sure you saw in the news that someone in the State Department apparently leaked some very critical information about discussions we had with the Iranians. What a disaster. The Iranians have now said, that's it. No more. We're not playing your game. We will act decisively. So I think the table is set for a tragedy, a big tragedy.
Yeah, and I had not seen that, what you were referring to there yet, but I assumed that was the case because they have shown so much restraint. I mean, going back to when their embassy was bombed and their assassination, in their capital city during an inauguration, and they were remarkably restrained. I think because they didn't want a wider war and they wanted to try and prevent that if they could. But if there's any more, I think that they probably have reached the end of their patience. But I wonder, in the last bit of time we have here, if you can talk about the military task and difficulty facing Israel. What could be an attainable military objective or a political objective if they use military power? Because given the size and the limitations of the Israeli armed forces in total, and the distance between them and Iran, and the difficulty with air or missile strength. What could Israel even do? Because unless you invade a country, you can't defeat it militarily. You can hurt it. But then if they can't defeat it, then what's the end state?
Israel knows that it cannot subjugate Iran on its own. That's why we are there. Israel cannot succeed in removing what it considers to be its most existential threat in the region without American military participation. Now, we've got roughly 1,000 fighters ready to go. We've got many, many missile systems primed and ready. But of course, the magazines are full, but they're not easy to replenish.
Right.
We don't have limitless supplies of missiles, but we've got quite a bit over there. And the assumption is that between the bombers and the missiles and our command of space with ISR strike or ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, that we can provide Israel with a war-winning, game-winning outcome. I'm not sure that's true because, again, the Russians are involved. They're not going to allow Iran to be pulverized. And I've always said, and anybody who understands great power politics understands this, if you set out to destroy a nation the size of Iran, and it's a large country, what are there, 90 million people in it? Yeah. Iran is probably the size in terms of square mileage of Western Europe. Now, they have two vast deserts inside the country and lots of mountain ranges, which have protected them for many years. So their population is concentrated in several cities. There's no question about that. But the notion that you can destroy or annihilate this place is a very dangerous assumption. First of all, Russia's not going to permit it. Let me be very clear on that. The Russians have said so. They will not allow Iran to be destroyed. Two, if we try to destroy it, it's going to redound to our disadvantage. If you remove Persia, Iran, this power, from the equation, who becomes powerful in the region? Israel? Not if it is being flattened by missiles. Not the United States that is now pariah in the region. No one believes us. No one trusts us. Everyone sees us as the poodle, that does what it's told by Israel. Well, Turkey is the primary beneficiary. The Turks will rise and become the dominant power. And ultimately, that's far more frightening, in my judgment, to the Israelis and potentially to Europe in some respects, depending upon what happens, than almost anything else I can think of. Because in contrast to Iran, that has no ground force to speak of, it's not marching any armies up to the Golan Heights. The Turks have substantial armies that they can field. They have substantial air forces and substantial naval power. whereas Iran is primarily reliant on its proxies and its missiles. So I don't see a good outcome here, and that's been my concern from the beginning for Israel. How does Israel benefit from this? How do they come out and go on? Because remember, they've also announced repeatedly to everyone who cared to listen that their neighbors are Amalek. And you say, well, they were only talking about the people in Gaza. Ask people in Jordan, Iraq, Iran, Turkey, Lebanon, what they think the Israelis meant. What a catastrophe. You have to live in a region and interact with the people that are there, and you've told them that they are subhuman animals that deserve the worst.
Yeah, and that's, I definitely that's the case. And because, especially when they further see action that, they're bombing the Houthis in Yemen, they're attacking now into Lebanon, looking to push way up beyond even the Litani River, according to where they've given orders for people to evacuate from. Now they're looking to go into Iran, and people have to wonder, are we next? And whether they are or not, it's a valid question to even ask. And so you see that there's a lot of trouble here. And even if we look for the United States ourselves, I mean, we've got a lot of vulnerability there. We just put this THAAD or ordered this THAAD system in there, and apparently it's going to be in place in some number of days with 100 Americans on the ground, 100 American uniforms. I assume there's also some contractors that will have to go along with that. And then all of these troops we have in Iraq and Syria spread out all over the place, all vulnerable to Iran should we get into a war with them.
Well, we don't go anywhere now without contractors, right, Dan? We know that. That's the American military, unfortunately. Some of it's unavoidable. There were contractors aboard the HMS Hood that sailed out to meet the Bismarck in 1939-40. So I think, it's impossible to go to war without contractors. But having said that, the bottom line is none of this makes any sense from a strategic standpoint. Not if you want Israel to survive. The first rule of all strategy is preserve your country, preserve its strength and its power. And this business of relying almost entirely on the expected intervention of American military power to rescue you or to exploit success and turn that success over to you, literally, I don't think is realistic.
Yeah, I don't either. In fact, I think that if anything, that this could you just further weaken our nation and put at greater risk our national security, because you pointed out, you hit the nail on the head a second ago. Yeah, our magazines are filled right now, and the weapons are loaded and cocked and all that. But we don't have that many to fight a war with in our own inventory, and our industrial capacity is not designed to be able to get into a sustained war anywhere, much less, if it's in multiple places. And, you got to suggest that if we do get it sucked into a war here and all of a sudden we start running low on ammunition, I mean, what's that going to do to Ukraine, number one? And is it going to actually cause other people to take more risk than they could because they see that we now don't have the capacity? That's part of the strategic risk for our country of doing the politically convenient thing of not holding Israel accountable for what they're doing here that I see.
Well, I don't know that it's a matter of convenience. It's just a fact of life.
Well, when I say convenience, I mean that it's like the administration doesn't want to risk upsetting the Israeli lobby and the Israeli voters ahead of this election coming up. So they're taking the easy path by not doing anything in our interest, I think.
Well, I think you're right that the administration wants to stay in power, and therefore they're not going to do anything to interrupt that. And it's really the money involved, not votes. Although I think you have Christians, evangelical Christians, who are certainly part of the voting bloc that you're referring to. The thing is, and this is what upsets me the most, 6 million Jews paid the ultimate price during the Second World War, and that was the down payment on Israel. Suddenly, 70 plus years later, everything is being put at risk. One throw of the dice is what you're talking about when Israel strikes Iran. That's it. That throw has got to be a winner. That's gambling. That's gambling with your country's existence. I think it's a bad idea. It's better to think in terms of multiple throws under different conditions, but I don't think they have multiple throws anymore. That's the point.
Yeah, that is the point. That is the risk for us all. And we'll continue to watch and see what happens with there. I mean, a response could come any day, could come later, could come after the election. Who knows? But we're going to continue to track this. And as always, we're very grateful for your observations and your historical knowledge, especially. Thank you for coming on, Doug.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. Bye-bye.
And thank you guys for coming and joining with us today. Also, we're going to have Larry Johnson on today at 2:00. And he's going to be going into a little bit more detail on this so-called victory plan and who's he kidding. And Larry Johnson, as only he can do, will be on with us at 2. So be sure and like and subscribe if you hadn't. Share with your friends so that they can join in with us too. And we will see you at 2:00 on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.